All right, Jayesh, can you just tell us a little bit about your background? You've got a very interesting background.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Jayesh Srivastava. I am a principal currently at the Boston Consulting Group with the X Ventures division, where we build new business units and joint ventures with clients. My background is all over the place. So I started out my career as a mechanical engineer at U of T, and I was studying just the traditional solid mechanics and car design stuff because I was really excited about getting into the industry. And through that, I got into some mechanical design courses where I realized I was much more interested in the design aspect than a lot of the thermodynamics and the calculations and fluid mechanics and all of that stuff. And that led me to a job at Canadian Tire, where the company was looking into designing its own products and having private label products being more personalized to the brand as opposed to just buying something off the shelf from vendors.
Mm.
And that was exciting because I got to work with industrial design consultancies, like at the time, Cooler Solutions that turned into Bridgeable. And it was exciting to go through the full process of like product strategy. So identifying the core customers, using methods to understand our users and customers better, like doing design research, and then working with experts and practitioners to develop products, and then working with vendors to actually um, build them. And then I went back to school because I really liked the idea of design research and I wanted to be better versed in it. So I ended up going back to school for design theory and methodology. And my master's was in coming up with ways to help designers be more creative, so ideation methods and brainstorming methods. And then I did my PhD in behavioral design, so specifically focusing on ideation methods and design research methods that help uh, designers understand and unpack user behaviors, and then also generate ideas to change those. And then from that, I got into consulting. So I moved to New York to come here for the X Ventures role. And then for a couple of years, I was building a product strategy team at CNN.
Yeah, a lot of things that you've been involved with your career. So we were particularly interested in diving more into the behavioral science piece, right? And
Sure.
design research. So I guess maybe can you talk a little bit about how you see, the learnings that you've taken from behavioral science having an impact on UX design and what's important?
Yeah, for sure. It's it's been an interesting journey because when I started, behavioral science seemed to be something like how people talk about generative AI or talked about metaverse a couple of years ago or blockchain solutions a couple of years before that, where it was a fun buzzword to throw around as this is going to help us unlock something that we can't
Mhm.
do otherwise. And it was an end to itself. Like learning it was exciting because there was some sort of hidden benefit that you were going to get out of it. So initially, it was a lot of the things that I did seem to be standalone application of behavioral science methods. So analyzing user behavior in a very systematic way using some sort of behavioral science theory, and then mapping it to what you want them to do and what habit you want to form, and then creating a product based on that. And it was treated as like a separate thing from traditional human-centered design. And where I've seen it evolve over the last few years is more of like an amplifier of existing human-centered design methods. So we know how to talk to users and understand them better. Let's also use some behavioral science lenses to look at specific things like their motivators, their triggers, the kinds of things that cause them to feel good about a behavior or feel bad about a behavior. And then that just adds richness to the existing things that we do, like build um, uh, user personas or archetypes, or when we're coming up with new product concepts, applying behavioral lenses to it to make them more focused on what you want the user to be doing rather than just kind of scattershot thinking about a cool new concept. So where it is today, I see it as more of like an add-on that makes the quality of the ideas better.
hmm And there seemed to be a lot of attention in the news, like a few years ago, with like Dan Ariely and I think Daniel Kahneman, like thinking fast and slow,
Yeah.
right? And just thinking about how behavioral science can have an impact. So did you find that that was also helpful in terms of more people understood what you were trying to do?
Yes, it was definitely helpful in terms of raising the profile of the ideas around it. So just thinking about persuasive design as a concept of, and then thinking about user habits as a concept and about these like system one and system two thinking. It was really helpful to just be able to have conversations with the clients when it came to client service work. Where it wasn't so helpful was that these were traditionally uh, people would learn about these things through like a pop psychology book. So they didn't have a lot of depth to them because the purpose of the book was just to give you an overview. And so people would think that if you've read the book Nudge, you kind of know everything about Thaler and Sunstein and you understand behavioral economics. And it's like, that should just be an opening or an entry point.
Mhm.
So that was hard because it, like the training of it by reading books seemed to make a lot of regular people think that you didn't need experts or you didn't need specialists to help you with it because I can just go and read Switch or I can just go and read um, Irrationality and I will have a handle on it and that's all I need.
Okay. And I guess maybe the next piece is, so having gone through the experiences that we've gone through, what advice or lessons do you kind of, would you maybe share with others in terms of if they're going to do this work?
Um, I think some of them are attached to just being a good designer and a good design researcher. So some of them have to do with craft. So like taking it seriously and staying up to date, staying connected with the behavioral science community. So just knowing what topics are in conversation at different times. And also what has traction, like the way people have talked about behavioral science has evolved over time from just like a few years ago, a lot of attention was being paid to dark patterns and working on how not to have negative outcomes as a result of applying behavioral science principles. Currently, it's being talked about in more different ways around just creating engagement with users without frustrating them. So just knowing and keeping in touch with how it's being perceived and what the community is talking about, I think has been really helpful and would be really helpful. And the other thing is, to the earlier point I was referring to, is like taking it seriously and like trying to convey that to non-practitioners, that this is something that you need to read up on more than just a pop psychology book. And this is something that it is helpful to have experts and specialists. And I think that's also a challenge that human-centered designers face generally now, because everyone's taken an IDEO masterclass and they feel comfortable with the concepts, but they don't necessarily appreciate how having multiple reps and like expertise that's bigger than that training is more beneficial, and that you need to have specialists work on it.
Yeah. And you brought up an idea, dark patterns. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Dark patterns?
Yeah, for sure. So dark patterns, the way that I'm talking about them are ways that we have found to engage users in behaviors that end up being detrimental to the user, which is totally against the spirit of behavioral science. It's not about getting people to do things that they don't want to do. It's much more about helping them do things that they have difficulty doing. And a lot of debate emerged around it after startups like Uber, for example, and Airbnb had found really clever ways to utilize interactions to get users to stay on the app longer, make decisions that they initially might not have wanted to do. So, for example, with Uber, there was a famous article, I think, in the New York Times that talked about things like how they encourage drivers to continue driving, even if they were tired and at the end of their shift and might not want to, just by making it seem like they were close to another threshold. How they got users to wait for rides so that the algorithm would be able to allocate more cars better. So those kinds of things which don't necessarily have a user benefit, but have a benefit to the company, are would be dark patterns. And then also in the game of in the realm of mobile gaming, that there are lots of games that people just describe as being addictive, but they don't necessarily enjoy the experience of playing them after a certain time. And so it's things like loot boxes, other types of interactions where they keep people engaged and maybe make them spend a lot of money in a mobile game, but it's not to the benefit of the user or the player. It's more to just trap them by using certain cognitive biases against them.
Great, thanks, Jayesh. That's a nice breakdown. So we want to talk a little bit now about just collaborative design in organizations. Okay. So my first question to you is just, how do you ensure everyone feels like their voices and ideas are being heard when it comes to teamwork in design?
Yeah, so the things that I've seen to be helpful are increasing the literacy about design in the leadership. So in the executive teams, whether it's at like the director level or higher, when they're thinking about creating projects, understanding the requirements as to how much design needs to be involved from the beginning, all the way to the execution, and understanding also how much time and resources they need to give the design team. So just like having been through cycles and understanding the design process, that's been really helpful. I think also the setup and project management styles, like typically there are delivery teams or project management teams that are responsible for this kind of work and just keeping timelines in check. And they usually have like agile training or some sort of methodology that they follow. I've worked in corporations where they've understood the role of the designer well in terms of giving them enough time and giving them enough opportunities to give input. And I've worked in organizations where they haven't really understood the designer's role as well, or given the designer as much autonomy. And so the designer ends up just executing ideas after they've been created and they've got a pretty tight schedule and they don't get to have as much of a say as they possibly could. So it's getting to that level of like whoever's running projects and managing projects, to get them to get designers to have more space.
And then, one of the things that you talked about is in your PhD, you were really, thinking through like design research and creativity, right? So what have you found is helpful from, the things that you were studying to bring into organizations to help them to actually create innovative, creative environments?
That's a great question. So there are things at different levels that I've found to be helpful as applications. So at the tactical level, techniques for ideation and brainstorming, whether it's things like using unrelated stimuli, so giving people specific things that they have to ideate off of, like making them use a random word generator and then coming up with ideas connected to it. Techniques like that, or using a technique like TRIZ, which is this ideation method that was developed by Soviet scientists in the 20th century, and things like that, which most people may not have encountered unless they went to design school. That's helpful because it gives them something novel to think through, and it breaks their traditional ideation ways. At a higher level, it's about persuasion, right? Like as a designer, your job is to get buy-in, either from your product team, if you're working in like a product environment, or if you're working in a corporate environment, it's to your executive leadership. And what I was studying was, how do you persuade people? So what are their motivations? How do you figure that out? What are the things that they're looking to get out of an experience, or what do they consider success to be? And you kind of have to apply that throughout your work and to get buy-in. And it's to get the resources that you need for your design team to be successful, to get them to believe your ideas as the right ones to move forward with, all of that. So it's weirdly a kind of sales training, because you're studying behavior change and creativity, and you can use that for other purposes.
So that's interesting to me to talk about getting buy-in. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think I I'm not sure how universal this problem is, but I've experienced it as as someone who came into design from an engineering background. I have noticed how designers are given credibility in some areas and not given credibility in other areas. And there are lots of people practicing design who have lots of different backgrounds and can be taken seriously for like understanding business if they have an MBA or product type work or even engineering. And a lot of the time when it comes to doing things like setting product strategy, so deciding what to build and in what order to build, designers have a lot of ideas, but they're either not in the room when the decision's being made, or their ideas are kind of discounted as like, oh, you're very good at like solving specific user needs, but you're not necessary for the higher level conversations that have to do with strategy. So I have been in the position of being like out of the room trying to get in. And now that I'm in more leadership positions, it's like trying to make sure that the design voices are also being heard so that we're not just specialists in our craft, but we also should be able to have purview over a broader set of topics.
Mm. So there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about in this area. So in talk about outside of the room and then being in the room, right? So, different conferences I've gone to, and this is a theme that comes up, right? About like, designers being at the table, right? And that's something that comes up. And one of the things that I've started to think about is like, okay, so to be in the room, you have to talk the language, right? So you have to make sure that you can talk the language and that you can communicate the ideas in a way that people will understand. But there's also significant value in talking about some things that people aren't talking about, right? Some of the things that may be, again, more from a design perspective that you can be strong on in terms of like what creates trust, right? What creates empathy. These are things that maybe other parts of the business haven't been thinking about as much, but then designers with their background experience, they do think about those things and they can start to communicate those. So, to me, one of the things I've been thinking about more, and I just like to get your perspective in terms of like, there's two pieces, right? So there's one, A, being able to talk the language of business, but then B, being able to say, hey, but there's this other piece, right? That isn't being communicated as much. And we need to also have conversations around that, right? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that really resonates with me. Like, I think a lot of it is understanding how what you're trying to convey is received and understanding what the people in the room where their motivations are and what their background is. So like what they're going to react to, what they're looking for. So I think I totally agree. Like that's one of the things I try to work with junior designers now is to really knowing that they are naturally trained at things like having empathy is like using that also in these kinds of settings and saying, hey, of these people, what do you think they're trying to get out of this meeting, or what do you think they're most worried about? And really not so much thinking about what you're about to present or your perspective is like, what do you think their expectations are? And so how do you navigate that? What do you need to say to get them to hear you? So that's definitely part of it. I think also one of the things that's more challenging is a lot of junior designers are respected because of their expertise and in what they know. And so they are used to being in the position of like being asked a very specific question and then coming up with an answer. Like, hey, can you find the best UX patterns for this thing that we need to do? Or we've got this user story, let's use your creativity to come up with solutions for it. They're not in the position usually of articulating the questions that need to be asked. Like someone always asks them questions. Whereas to be in leadership, that it needs to switch. Like they need to come into a room and be able to ask the right questions, because the business people don't know the details of the engineering team, but they have the confidence to ask questions of the engineering team and not feel like they're on the hook for it. So that I haven't cracked myself. It's just in consulting, it's kind of good in that you're just expected at a certain level to not be a specialist anymore, and then you're responsible for asking questions and not delivering specific insights. But I don't think designers know that coming in, that at some point you're not going to be known for your skills specific to your craft. It's like you're going to be known for, can you manage expectations in a room? Can you ask questions? Can you understand team members who do something that is totally different?
Yeah, thanks, Jayesh. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's, I think, all we need to cover for just, collaboration and design and organization. So the last area that we wanted to talk a little bit more about was just volunteering and how volunteering can be helpful for improving your skills. So you've done quite a bit of volunteering work from what we can see.
A little bit.
Yeah, so can you maybe just talk about how your volunteer work has changed the way you approach problem solving in any way?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because the conversation we were just having was about maybe taking a systematic approach to development of like targeting particular skills you want to learn and going about it in a structured way. I think I really like to take that hat off when it's more fun things or when it comes to things like volunteering, and just kind of see organically what you end up learning or a connection you end up making. And that's what I've appreciated. So it's in volunteering settings, whether it's like working for a specific cause or just applying your skills to a specific need. Like I got to do a project a couple of years ago where we were building the business plan for a high school in a northern Ontario town. And it was just an opportunity to connect with people from very different walks of life that otherwise you wouldn't see in a workplace or in my workplace. And that created more opportunities for me to think about things like doing user research in a more novel way, because I had to do user research, as it turns out, in that project. And I had to do it remotely. And I had to also understand a totally different context. And I was able to actually get a lot of insights from that experience that ended up being one of the chapters in my PhD. So, but that wasn't planned. It just was an opportunity. And I think it's like leaving the door open for those things and being inspired. So that's where volunteering has been really helpful. And then also what's good about volunteering is it's the last place people will pigeonhole you because they just need another hand. So whatever you want to add value in, you're able to do. And that's also helpful because, for example, in that case, and then in other cases, I've been the treasurer and I don't have an accounting background, but I got to see what all that meant. Like I didn't know what accounts receivable or payable meant before that. And it wasn't training, but it was at least familiarity with those kinds of things, which otherwise I'd never in a professional setting have that opportunity.
Mm. Yeah, so there's a couple things there, JS. You talked about just an opportunity to explore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Different things that you might not usually get a chance to explore. You talked about connecting with different types of people. So individuals that maybe you wouldn't be exposed to in your working environment. And then the last thing you talked about was inspiration, right? In terms of just an opportunity to be inspired by doing some things that you're not, that you weren't doing before. Anything else that you want to add?
I think it's also kind of a refilling of the tank for me. So those kinds of activities are fulfilling in and of themselves. There's no end goal that you're looking for as like a business goal or a professional goal. And it's nice to be able to focus energy on it as a kind of refresher to then come back to what you do as a day job, more focused and a little bit cleared.
Cool. Okay, great. Thanks, Jayesh. So last thing for us is just asking you a little bit about, what's on your mind for the future? What are you excited about either learning about, tackling, diving into in more detail in the next little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, a couple of things that are on my radar are the future of human-centered design, just as a methodology. There have been a couple of pieces this year about a kind of disillusionment with the traditional double diamond process, and there's a lot of evidence now from work that's been done because the methodology has been applied so many times that there's a track record now of examples where that may not have been the right approach, or it didn't lead to good outcomes, or it didn't end up solving the problem as intended. So I am excited about what the next iteration of that looks like. So I don't usually see that as a problem, the fact that it's being challenged, or there are cases where applying a traditional human-centered design approach wasn't the answer, because it's just an opportunity for us to like learn from. So I particularly selfishly am interested in adding more behavioral science components to the next iteration of human-centered design, so that we don't think about users as one persona. We think about them, for example, as mindsets that they go into and out of, depending on the state that they're in. That we also don't think about designing generally. We think about designing for a specific purpose using a behavioral science lens. Like, what do you want them to be able to do that they can't do? So I'm not sure where it's going to land, but I want to contribute to that conversation. That's been big. I think the other thing also is I'm excited about the overlap between design and product, because that's been something that's become bigger and bigger throughout my career, where product managers used to have a technical background and designers came from a more specific like arts background or a research background, but realizing that you need to be able to understand how things are built just as well as what you should be building. I think helping junior designers develop those skills earlier. So going back to your earlier point of knowing what people need to hear, and knowing how to convey your insights in a way that's useful for them. I think it's also partly about like understanding how digital products are built, and really getting ahead of the build planning, so that you are involved in making more decisions. And you're also not just being a designer, unless you want to be, which is fine, but you're a product owner, just like the other product owners.
All right, thanks, Jayesh. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay, perfect. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Jayesh. Again, I think it's awesome for us to hear some of the things that you're thinking about for the future.
Thank you.